Jim Cornette will no longer be appearing on NWA Powerrr, as he and the NWA have parted ways after a comment that he made during the Nick Aldis-Trevor Murdoch match on this week's show that was missed in the editing. He used an old joke that he has told many times before, dating back over 30 years, which really is where the joke should have been left, saying that Murdoch is the only man he has ever known that could strap a bucket of fried chicken to his back and drive a motor scooter across Ethiopia. David Lagana, who has been on this show before, he is the vice president of the NWA. He issued a public apology for his comments, and he quickly took the show down from YouTube to edit the joke out before re-uploading the show. He issued a statement, initially, saying, "On tonight's episode of NWA Powerrr, one of our talents made comments which some viewers found offensive. We deeply regret this error and apologize. We have temporarily taken the program down while we correct this error," which they did. The NWA later issued another statement, seeing all of the backlash over what had happened. The writing was on the wall. They put this statement out announcing that Jim Cornette had resigned from the NWA effective immediately. As an announcer on the November 19th edition of Powerrr, Jim made remarks during a singles match between Nick Aldis and Trevor Murdoch that were both offensive and do not meet the high standards of decency and good faith of the National Wrestling Alliance. To ensure that such an error can never happen again, we have established new procedures of review for all NWA programming going forward. We sincerely regret our failure in this regard. Now, I've held my thoughts about this. I wanted to wait to hear Cornette's side of the story, which is why I've not said anything about this. I knew he was going to be addressing it on Friday on his podcast, and I wanted to get his side first, and then after listening to Cornette's podcast, my opinion has not changed. But it was at least good to hear where he was coming from on this, but it has not changed my mind at all. First, it was an oversight on the NWA's part, no question. They admitted as much at the end of that statement I just read. They acknowledge that it was a failure. There's no rationale for it. It was just an oversight and a failure on their part. Dave Lagana edits these shows by himself. It's a lot of hours. And Cornette, in talking to Lagana about it, according to Cornette, asked him, if it was such a bad thing, how come you didn't take it out of the show? You've had 6 weeks to edit it. How did it make the air? And Lagana told him it just passed right by him while he was editing. He just missed it. This was a stupid joke from Cornette's old bag of tricks. He's used it at least 2 other times that we have video of, verbatim, word for word. And as times change, Jim Cornette does not. He said on his podcast it was a starvation joke. It was not meant to be a racist joke. Back in the mid-'80s, there was a horrible famine in Ethiopia. Millions of people died. That was the reason behind the Live Aid concert in 1985, to help raise money to go towards the relief of the famine in Ethiopia. I was too young at that time to know what Live Aid even was. I was too busy playing with my LJN figures. But I learned about it later. Same thing with the We Are the World album. And the big charity song they all recorded, all the artists got together. That was also to help with the famine relief in Ethiopia. But if you're wondering, why would Cornette single out Ethiopia? That would be why. Just to give some context and some background to why Ethiopia. He said that he first used it as a joke many, many years ago to help put over Big Bubba Rogers, who he was managing at the time. And he thought it was hilarious. Rogers thought it was hilarious as well. This guy is so big and tough, you could strap a bucket of fried chicken to his back and he could run through this country where people are starving to death, and nobody would mess with him. That was sort of the idea behind it. He used a bucket of fried chicken, he said, because he thought it was funnier than saying a plate of sushi, for example. So that's why he used it. And then he kind of, sort of, but not really, issued an apology on his podcast. He said, "I'm not that sorry because it was a joke. And if you don't like the joke, that's fine. I would even apologize for a bad joke. But this goddamn feedback was above and beyond the offense. and I didn't mean it in any racist way, for fuck's sake. I in no way was thinking in that direction. To anyone who was legitimately offended by a bad joke, in kinda sort of a way, and would accept a reasonable apology, as humans sometimes do, yes, I'm sorry, because I did not intend it that way. I believe Jim Cornette when he says that he didn't think it was a racist joke. Of course, that doesn't mean it wasn't. I believe that he believes it wasn't a racist joke. I think he honestly, in his mind, thinks, what's the big fucking deal here? It's just a starvation joke. He brought up the Starvin' Marvin episode of South Park and how funny it was. Now, his co-host, Brian, who also fell on the side of, I didn't like the joke, he asked him point blank to clarify, twice. Did you resign or were you fired? Because in the statement it says you resigned. Is that true or were you let go? Were you released? And both times Cornette tap danced around it without giving a straight answer. He said he got hot at Lagana on their last phone call and he hung up on him. As he admits that he is known to do when he gets really angry. He hung up on Dave Lagana. And it was after that Lagana put the statement out on behalf of the NWA announcing that Cornette had resigned his position. He quit. Effectively, he quit. When he hung up the phone, that was his way of basically, or at least from the NWA's perspective, well, I guess he quits. He resigns. Now look, times change. If Bobby Heenan was alive today and said some of the things now that he did 30 years ago, he would be yanked off the air so fast you wouldn't believe it. Talking about Virgil going through people's bags in the back during the Royal Rumble match, or calling Tito Santana's finish the Flying Jalapeno. Jesse Ventura at one of the WrestleManias saying, I bet Tito wishes he was back selling tacos in Tijuana. And people laughed at them. I still laugh at a lot of those one-liners. Some of them, others, I just cringe at. The really, blatantly offensive ones, how the hell did they get away with this? Or Gorilla Monsoon making inside jokes during matches with wrestlers who were believed to have been gay by saying they attended the Terry Garvin School of Self-Defense. Or that their favorite move was the go-behind. Very funny. Until you find out years later that Terry Garvin allegedly molested ring boys. Then it wasn't so funny anymore. Times change. Jim Cornette does not change. Jim Cornette has said a lot of things about a lot of people. He has threatened to murder Vince Russo. He constantly shits on Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, which is his right to do so if he so chooses. But it was really something in listening to his podcast to hear him lay the blame for this entire controversy on what he would call the AEW fanboys, or whatever name he has assigned to them. He blamed this whole fiasco on all the AEW fans who hate him because he shits on the product. And he blamed it on the NWA because you didn't edit it out. It's everybody else's fault. I don't doubt there are people who are just waiting to jump on the first thing Cornette says to try to cancel him. He's always going to have enemies out there looking for his head, but to lay the blame on them and not the stupid shit that came out of his own mouth is laughable. Up until this week, he represented the NWA. He was one of the voices on NWA Powerrr. It's a show and a brand that are actively trying to grow. The NWA has a responsibility to its talent, to its fans, to get rid of anybody who they feel is undermining their product. And maybe in this case he quit, he wasn't fired. Well, maybe he should have been. Maybe he should have been. Because that's the responsibility that they have to their product. You know, NWA Powerrr is a throwback show to the old studio days of wrestling in the 1980s and even before that. Cornette apparently felt that this extended to his jokes as well. Here's what it all boils down to. Jim Cornette can go on his podcast and he can say whatever he wants. That is his right. But when you work for someone else and you say something stupid in the course of doing your job, you run the risk of losing that job. Jim Cornette lost his gig because he said something stupid. And it is not the first time that Dave Lagana has felt the need to issue a statement of apology for something that Jim Cornette said. The other time was just 3 weeks ago. That was for the comments that he made on his podcast and not on an NWA show, saying that one of the promoters for Progress Wrestling, I think Jim Smallman, should hang himself for the way that he dresses. I didn't even know about the comments until the NWA put an apology out about it. That turned into this PSA for suicide prevention, saying that they don't endorse telling people to kill themselves. Even if you are of the belief that it was all blown out of proportion, you are missing the point. That is twice this month alone that they have had to apologize for this guy, and they have been made to look bad by even being associated with him. This was the second time. And all of this is after 2 days worth of tapings. I know it feels like more because the show's been on for like 8 weeks. It took 2 days worth of tapings 6 weeks ago for Cornette to talk himself right out of a job. That's impressive. That is impressive. Yes, it never should have aired to begin with. So the NWA deserves blame for this as well. But the NWA should not have to feel the need to apologize twice in 1 month for offensive shit that Jim Cornette has said. And if they do, that means you need to get rid of him. He left them with no choice. NWA Powerrr should be trending. It was trending when all of this happened. NWA Powerrr should be trending because people like the show, not because Jim Cornette said something racist or bigoted or misogynistic or homophobic or transphobic or anything that takes the conversation away from the show itself. That's not fair to the talent. That's not fair to Nick Aldis or James Storm, or Tim Storm, or Trevor Murdoch, or Thunder Rosa, or Marty Bell, or anyone else on that show. He became a distraction. What I heard was a guy making a joke that involved fried chicken and a country in Africa. And if you can't see why people would think that that's racist, and that cracking jokes about black people and fried chicken isn't a common stereotype, well, guess what? Now you know. Because it is. I didn't hear the joke until after the episode had already been pulled. I only heard about it after it became a big controversy. So when I finally heard it, the moment that he said fried chicken, I knew nothing good was going to come out of this. Had he said hot dogs or hamburgers, we're not having this conversation right now. And Jim Cornette would still be employed. Because believe me, people are not raising the same kind of fuss about starving Ethiopians. Maybe they should. So he would have been fine. Until the next dumb joke. I mean, let's be honest, this was inevitable. If it didn't happen now, it would have happened a month from now. They have a live pay-per-view in 3 weeks. All these shows are in the can. These are all taped. They have a live pay-per-view in 3 weeks. Imagine Cornette on a live show making a crack like that, or worse. If Cornette was a stand-up comedian, and being edgy like that was part of his shtick, then that might work for him. In this setting on this television show, you can't be doing that. I don't believe that they hired Jim Cornette because of how controversial he can be. And that was what they wanted. Oh boy, Jim always is offending people. We need to have that on our show. I don't believe for a second that's why they brought him in. I think they hired Jim Cornette because he was that link. He was that connection to the old studio days that they were looking for. And he's very good at the commentary desk. Let's be fair to him in that respect, at least. When he's not saying dumb shit, he's a pretty good commentator. He's good in that role. So that, I believe, is why they brought him in. And he fit in perfectly in that studio setting. And then he went and he fucked it all up. He can't help himself, so he had to go. He became a liability. I don't think the NWA signed up for any of this. But when you sign Jim Cornette, you take the good with the bad. And you need to be ready for it to blow up in your face. And for Billy Corgan and Dave Lagana and everybody else in the NWA, they took a risk and it backfired. And now they have to clean up the mess. Now, I don't know if they plan to keep his commentary in the remaining shows that were taped, or if they're going to edit them out somehow. I don't even know how practical that is. You got a 2-man booth, an hour-long show, unless you can find a way to edit him out and then Joe Galli is talking to himself. I mean, I do it every week, but I don't know how practical that is. Their pay-per-view is not until December 14th. So they have a few shows left to go. They have not announced what their plans are going to be. Who could replace him? Who would you replace Jim Cornette with in the booth with Joe Galli on NWA Powerrr? If they're looking for a legend from years ago, one with the gift of gab, I don't think you could go wrong with somebody like Dirty Dutch Mantell, Zeb Coulter. You know, he could be a good candidate if he was interested. If they prefer somebody younger with wrestling broadcast experience, maybe a guy like Matt Stryker will get the call. You know, Lucha Underground is obviously dead and buried. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I've enjoyed the NWA show since it debuted. It's an easy hour of wrestling to watch every week. And it sucks that it's been overshadowed by all of this nonsense. But I also don't think that we've seen the last of Jim Cornette involved with a wrestling promotion. Everybody thinking Cornette's been canceled. This is the end of Jim Cornette. Meltzer had a whole bio on him in The Observer. You would think it was an obituary. You would think the guy was dead. He's going through his whole career, like a whole career retrospective. I don't believe that we've seen or heard the last of Jim Cornette on wrestling TV. And I'm sure after this dies down, he's always popping up somewhere. I'm sure when this dies down, it may be months from now, I don't think this is going to be any different. But the next promotion that decides to climb into bed with this guy, if they decide to do so, does so at their own peril. Talented as he may be, I don't think it's worth it.